John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. Later in the program, President Trump has ordered that all of the classified documents surrounding the Kennedy assassination be made public. And after 62 years, it's high time that people get all of the information available about what happened that day in Dallas in 1963. Reporter Jefferson Morley, who's led the charge to release those records, will join me in the second half of the program. But we begin with voting in Arizona, which has been a continuing topic of debate and discussion in this state. And Maricopa County Board Chairman Tom Galvin joins me now to talk about legislation to speed up the results we get in Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
What have you got cooked up? I know that there's two bills, Senate and House bill.
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, we're trying to accomplish great things here to make elections even better in Arizona. So Senate President Warren Peterson has sponsored SB 1011, and there's a mirror bill in the House 2703 that does three fundamental things. It removes the cutoff date for you to drop off early ballots from Election Day to the Friday before the election.
Okay.
It forces government buildings to open up more polling sites because we're going to have more people showing up to vote in person. This would include public schools. And then third, it's going to allow people to vote in person on Saturday and Monday before Election Day. The reason why is to have more votes tabulated by election night. There's about 45 other states that have about 95% of their votes tabulated on election night. Arizona is not one of them. I call it a 95-to-1 plan, and this is important. It's essential for the governor to sign it.
Yeah, the governor is claiming, I know you guys are kind of going at it. The governor claims that it will make it harder for people to vote. True or false?
False. Absolutely false, because here's why. This bill actually improves access to voting. One of the things it does, John, is expands the voting days from 27 days to 29 days. So you have 2 more days to vote. And also, the opportunities will still be there to vote either in person, to mail in your ballot. But now, if we're going to open up more places for people to vote, that means you're expanding opportunities to vote. And if you're moving in-person voting from just Election Day to the Saturday and Monday before Election Day, I think you get it. It's more opportunities to vote. So her arguments ring hollow.
Okay, because it's 2 more days in the total.
Right.
If you show up on Saturday or Monday, you can vote in person.
Yes.
But they would be checking your ID.
Right.
Is this onerous in any way?
No, I don't think so. The funny thing is I vote in person now, but I don't
on
vote.
Election Day?
No, I don't vote on Election Day. I vote at a voting center before then. However, what happens is I then have to put my ballot in an envelope and then sign it for signature verification because it's still considered an early vote. That is ridiculous. I've already showed my ID. They verified who I am. They've given me the ballot, but it slows down the process here in downtown Phoenix. So what we want to do is if you show up before Election Day to vote in person, it's as if you're an Election Day voter. And to me, that's just common sense.
If the legislature, the governor, if you pass this, the governor likely would veto either of these bills?
I'm optimistic. I think the governor right now is staking out a position, but last year we had election reform bills. We were worried that overseas and military voters would not get their votes counted for the general election. She came out and said she would veto it. She signed it. So I think she should, and I think she ultimately will sign this bill.
Do you think the chances are more likely because she's entering an election year?
I think she needs to work with us Republicans. I don't think the voters of Arizona want to see the governor just use her veto stamp on everything. I understand if she feels that there's some bills that are so ridiculous she's not going to sign them all, but at some point she has to play ball. She has to listen. This has received bipartisan support. The Arizona Association of Counties supports this bill because it has many things they've been asking for. John, this is a bipartisan group of people, 15 different counties, rural and urban, Democrat and Republican. They support the bill. She should sign it.
Would this look pretty much like Florida if we were to get this approved?
Yeah, and the reason why people...
Which gets its results that night.
They get it that night, but also I think it's important because Arizona is one of 7 swing states. And as you know, in November, even though Ruben Gallego ran comfortably ahead of his opponent for the Senate race, it wasn't called until Saturday after the election. That's pretty ridiculous. If we're going to have a presidential race and it's going to come down to Arizona, we don't want it to come down to just our state and 10 days later people still wondering who's president of the United States.
Let's say it doesn't if it passes through the legislature, the House, the Senate, and the governor doesn't sign it, what do you think would happen if it went to the people, and do you think there would be an opportunity and a route to put it on the ballot?
So there's an opportunity for the Republicans in the legislature to directly refer it to the ballot, and I think it's going to pass overwhelmingly. And one reason why is that right now when I travel the county, I speak to groups. These are nonpartisan groups. People are Republican, Democrat, Independent. I ask, show of hands, how many want to see faster results in election night? John, everyone raises their hand. Everyone. Democrats.
You think it's an 80-20 issue?
It's a 90-10 issue.
No, seriously.
I am serious. Not one person, and when I speak on this, comes up to me and says, I oppose this. They all say we want this.
What about the argument that you know, it could disenfranchise voters? You hear this a lot.
I hear it a lot, but this is not a case where people are being disenfranchised. This is a case where people have opportunities to vote in a variety of ways, which is what Arizona offers. You can drop off your ballot at a polling place anytime until the Friday before the election. But guess what, John? There's still opportunities to do it after. You just have to go to the county's headquarters, downtown Phoenix, and drop it off. Or you can go to these more expanded polling sites that we're going to have. Okay,
let's move on. You and the newly elected recorder, Justin Heap, the board and Heap are at odds right now. Lawmakers at the Capitol are saying you guys are attempting to remove Heap from the election process, that you're basically gutting him and hog-tying him, and he can't do his job.
Yeah. With all due respect to those state legislators taking pot shots at the county, they don't know how the county works. State law bifurcates election responsibilities. The recorder has certain responsibilities, the Board of Supervisors has certain responsibilities, and there's 5 of us. So I cannot unilaterally do anything. It takes 3 votes, of course, to move anything. But the recorder's in charge of voter registration and mailing out early ballots. The Board of Supervisors are in charge of tabulating the votes, conducting elections on election day, and then certifying the election. It's ultimately the buck stops with us in terms of
That's
that
right.
vote.
A lot of people don't know that.
They don't know that.
You take over the election when you get to the counting process.
That's right. But sometimes state law is ambiguous over who does what. And so what we've had for over the last 8 years are these operating agreements. The recorder wants to renegotiate the operating agreements. We're okay with that. We're going to do that. So we're going to work with the recorder to get that operating agreement updated.
It's been contentious, though, right out of the gate. And is this necessary? And by the way, Heap in January authorized immediate removal of 240,000 inactive voters.
Right.
Was that a good move, or was it an overreach?
From what I can tell, everything the recorder has done has been above board and legal. Every 2 years, the recorder's office has to remove inactive voters. These are people who've either moved away, they passed away, they changed their registration. So the recorder has a job to clean up the voter rolls. I haven't seen anything to say that he's done anything wrong. I'm not going to criticize the recorder.
Okay. Have you cut his budget?
No, we haven't cut his budget. We've only been in our new term
this chatter on Twitter is not true?
It's completely false. It's completely false. But we are reviewing the budget. And one of the things he's asking for is 31 positions. He's also asking for an increase of $5 million of his budget, which is a 42% increase. We, as the Board of Supervisors, who are stewards of your tax dollars, we're going to take a look at it, but the budget gets approved this June. So nothing's happened yet.
As you've watched this, do you think he's up to the job?
So far, yeah. I mean, he's been elected by the voters. The voters felt that he's up to the job. I want him to do well.
Yeah, he won by a pretty sizable margin.
He won by a sizable margin. I want him to do well because he's my colleague. He's my partner. He has to work with the Board of Supervisors, but he also has to understand that he has responsibilities, but so do we.
Okay. Board of Supervisors Chair Thomas Galvin.
Thank you,
Good
John.
to see you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We're back in a minute. And when we return on Newsmaker, again, President Trump has ordered the release of all the remaining files surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy. What is in there, and what more might we learn about what happened in Dallas of November of 1963? Washington Post reporter and historian Jefferson Morley, who has worked on this for 30 years, joins me next on Newsmaker. Welcome back on Newsmaker. It has been 62 years since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas. And still, so many questions remain about what happened that day. Did Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, kill the president? That was the official finding of the Warren Commission. But curiously, many of the records surrounding the assassination have remained sealed all these years. But President Trump, a couple of weeks ago, recently signed an executive order that demanded that all the records surrounding the JFK assassination and the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King be made public. For 30 years, Washington Post reporter and historian Jefferson Morley has led the charge to release those records. And Mr. Morley, kind enough to join me now on Newsmaker. Great to see you, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, John.
We've got some news breaking. The president's apparently been delivered at least what we think may be some answers.
Well, we have heard that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has sent a plan on the JFK files to the president. That's all we know. So I would say this is not, they've sent documents to the president or made documents public, but they have presented a plan. So the key to this whole thing is implementation. You know, President Trump and President Biden both deferred to CIA demands for secrecy previously on these records. And so that may happen again. So we need to know what's in the plan because implementation is everything.
Yeah, you've talked about that, and I've listened to you. I've read your work, and you talk about benchmarks. You got to have them. You got to meet them. Let me just ask you, overarching, people watching this, tuning in right now, what do you think is in this stuff, and why the secrecy for 62 years?
To understand what we're going to learn, you need to understand what we've learned in recent years. And that has not been well reported because it's not a smoking gun proof of conspiracy. It's merely very interesting detail that fills out the assassination story. So, for example, the CIA itself did not believe the story of a lone gunman, okay?
Wow.
A few days after the assassination, the CIA station in Miami ordered all of its agents to start reporting on the assassination of the president. And the agents in Miami were asked to put a series of questions to their sources, okay? Now, the president was killed. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. He denied killing the president, and he was killed in police custody. So after that series of events, where the government said and assured people that very week this man acted alone and he had no conspirators, the CIA station in Miami didn't believe that, and they set out to investigate the possibility that the president's assassination was the work of anti-Castro exiles opposed to President Kennedy's policies, men who were known to the CIA in South Florida. We didn't learn about this investigation until 2017 when a memo was declassified about it, and we still don't know the results of this investigation. So that's one thing that we learned recently. Another thing that we learned in the last couple of years is that Lee Harvey Oswald was not a lone nut, okay, who was unknown to the US government and then he up and shot the president. Lee Harvey Oswald was very well known to a small group of senior CIA officials who had been monitoring his movements, his political contacts, and his personal life for 4 years, from November 1959 to November 1963. We now know that in November 1963, counterintelligence chief James Angleton, one of the top men in the CIA, had a dossier on Oswald that ran to 180 pages. And he had been informed by the FBI in late October 1963 that Oswald had returned from a trip in Mexico City and was living in the Dallas area. Okay? That story alone, and the fact that the CIA told the Warren Commission we didn't know much about this guy, means that the official story is completely open to question.
Well,
it's based on a lie.
It's an astonishing thing. Jeff, do you believe that they knew, if they had been surveilling him and checking in on him, that he had gotten a job at the school book depository on the motorcade route in Dallas? Then you've got all kinds of questions.
We don't know that they had that granular a knowledge of Oswald's movements, but we do know that Angleton himself and his staff knew that Oswald was in the Dallas area. So anything that is related to Angleton should be made public, because anything he was doing is connected to his handling of the Oswald file. Well, one of the documents that is heavily redacted, and we'll see if we get it, is 113 pages of testimony that Angleton gave to Senate investigators in 1975. This 50-year-old document is riddled with redactions that have been requested by the CIA. So will we see that entire testimony and understand better what Angleton was doing at the time that he was monitoring Oswald? That's a key question. And it's not a conspiratorial question. It's it's an obvious question that anybody who's interested in the assassination story will want the answer.
Yeah, it's a journalistic question.
Yeah,
Jeff,
yeah.
is it possible that what we will find out is that it is incredibly embarrassing to the CIA, maybe even the FBI, and an intelligence failure when it came to Oswald, that they knew this guy, they were following him around, at least keeping tabs on him for 4 years, and then he ends up killing the president? It looks god-awful for the alphabet agencies.
Yes.
Is it
Now,
possible they're just protecting their rear end?
I've heard that argument. I don't believe it, and I don't believe it for this reason. You know, the doctors who tried to save Kennedy's life, the Dallas doctors.
Yes.
Kennedy was actually still alive after he was shot, mortally wounded in the head, but when he got to Parkland Hospital, he was still alive. The doctors who tried to save his life over the course of the next half hour before he died did not speak about what they had seen of the president's wounds. They spoke very circumspectly to the Warren Commission, who asked leading questions. But these men got together late in life, and they are the subject of an excellent documentary available on Paramount Plus called What the Doctors Saw. And I urge anybody to look at it, because these doctors, eminent medical professionals, very well respected in the Dallas area, they said that they agreed unanimously the president was hit by gunfire from 2 different directions. And so that alone calls the lone gunman scenario into question. Now, was the CIA, just hiding the fact that they missed this guy who fired 3 shots at the president, one of which missed? I mean, the medical evidence doesn't support that's what really happened with the gunfire. The medical evidence, the eyewitness evidence, supports the idea the president was hit by gunfire.
Let me push back on that for a moment, because, and I'm sure you've read it, Vincent Bugliosi's incredible book on this, Reclaiming History.
Yeah.
His argument has been, and he's a prosecutor, he's no longer with us, but a delightful guy. His argument is, okay, if someone else was firing, where are the ordnance? Where are the bullet fragments? Because everything they recovered in that limousine and in Kennedy and in Conley all came back to Oswald's gun. So his argument is the ballistics don't support that there was a second shooter.
The ballistics the forensics on the head wound do not connect to Oswald's gun. There were no bullet fragments recovered, and if you look at the X-rays of the president's wound, you see a trail of fragments that is the debris of a soft shell, not a hard shell bullet. So the forensic evidence, and I would step back and say, what have we learned about all of this evidence since in the recent years? Okay. The notion that Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots that Lee Harvey Oswald, a person unknown to the CIA, fired 3 shots at the president, 1 of which missed and 2 of which hit the president and Texas Governor Connolly, the evidence just doesn't support that. That's not what people in the car thought. Nobody in the car, Jackie Kennedy, John Connolly, Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service man, John Connolly's wife, none of them thought that that's what happened. The bystanders who were within 15 feet of Kennedy's limousine when the gunfire erupted, they didn't think that that's what happened. They thought gunfire had come from 2 different directions. 21 law enforcement officers on the scene thought that gunfire had come from in front of the motorcade. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there was not one person firing. So at the president. So what I come back to is, we have a choice. The CIA knew all about this guy, which they lied about. And you can say they're lying to cover up their innocence or their incompetence, or they're lying to cover up an operation. And as somebody who's been writing about the CIA for a long time, I take that second possibility very seriously.
I know you do.
There was an operation involving Oswald, and they're still keeping it secret because that's what they do. They keep their operations secret.
Wow, that is so, I mean, if true, it will absolutely shake the public, I think, to their core. Now, granted, a lot of folks are no longer alive in this country who were around when that happened. I was 3, but I have taken deep dives into this subject through the years.
Yeah. And this is why, is why we need full disclosure, because there's legitimate arguments on both sides, and I have good friends who say that I'm wrong on this. That's fine,
Yes.
I'm not pushing a theory on anybody. I'm saying this is what the evidence tells me.
Yeah, and you're saying release the evidence, right?
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's a journalistic question.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing to look for is, if we don't get these records right away, then that somebody's circumventing the president's order, and that would be very unfortunate. I hope that the weight of public opinion, the clarity of the president's call, the fact that Congress has passed a law unanimously saying all this has been made public, there's no counter argument that all of this stuff should be made
Jeff,
public.
quick question.
Sure.
Do you think, since you've covered the CIA, you know how this agency operates, if there were anything that incredible that the CIA was somehow in on this, why would anybody keep any records of it?
Well, that's a very common observation that, anything incriminating would have been destroyed a long time ago. But if you understand how the CIA works, they're a record-keeping organization. They don't want to tell other people what they're doing, but they need to know themselves what actually happened. So while you think they might destroy records of incriminating activity, their view of it is rather more amoral, which is this is a covert operation that we have to protect.
What would have been the motive?
In late 1963, there was intense opposition to Kennedy's policies on Cuba, Vietnam, and the Soviet Union. And a lot of people in those upper echelons of those agencies regarded Kennedy not just as a weak president or a misguided president, but as a president who was actually a threat to U.S. national security. And so I personally think that the president was killed by enemies of his policies who had the ability to make the crime look like something else and put the blame on somebody else.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oswald, would Oswald, this is another argument Bugliosi makes, would Oswald have been a guy you would have recruited to do an operation like this? The guy was unstable, tried to commit suicide when he was in Minsk.
I don't think that Oswald was recruited for an assassination operation, and I don't think the evidence is even strong that he fired a gun in Dealey Plaza that way. No, the CIA didn't hire Oswald for some top secret covert mission. Oswald was manipulated. He was not a source or an agent. He was what people in the CIA call an agent of influence. Okay? He's somebody who will do something for you, right? He doesn't know the meaning of what he's doing for you, but it's something helpful to you. That's who Oswald was.
So you think these were professional shooters?
Yeah. I was very influenced by a former CIA officer who gave a talk in 2019 and talked about the Dealey Plaza events in Dealey Plaza as a covert operation. And he wasn't talking about personal experience from his career in the CIA. He was just analyzing what happened. And he said it's perfectly consistent with the evidence to say this is a very tightly held covert operation to kill the president and lay the blame on somebody else. And he stressed a point that I also think is important. People say, oh, well, somebody would have talked by now. It's too big a thing. Somebody would have known. He said that's not true. And he said from personal experience, and this is a guy who was very high in the CIA, he said, some of our best operations, our most consequential operations, were only known to 3 or 4 or 5 people.
Quickly, Jeff, where do people find your book? I know you've got a book you've got several on the subject.
Yeah, Jefferson Morley Books is where I sell my CIA books. The Ghost, which is the biography of James Angleton, and Scorpion's Dance, which is about CIA Director Richard Helms and President Richard Nixon, and then Our Man in Mexico about CIA Station Chief Win Scott in Mexico City. All 3 men are involved in the events that lead to Kennedy's assassination and the investigation afterwards.
Jefferson Morley, historian and reporter, I sure appreciate your time. This was fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
We're gonna check back in with you, okay, when we start to learn some things. Is that all right?
Yes, I'd love to do it.
Okay. Jeff, thank you. Back in a minute
care.
on Newsmaker. Thanks to Jefferson Morley and Thomas Galvin for joining us. We will see you next week on Newsmaker.